And I'd like to welcome you to the House, Minister. You're very welcome today. And to welcome in the gallery Deputy Catherine Martin, the chairperson of our Oireachtas Women's Caucus, and just to commend Deputy Martin for all her great work in chairing the caucus and bringing all of us together as women members of both houses, and in initiating the debate on period poverty and the wording of this motion. And of course, as colleagues will be aware, this is a motion that was already debated in the Dáil during International Women's Week around the 8th of March. We thought we would bring it in here in the Seanad, also in the same spirit as a cross-party motion being proposed by all members of both of the Seanad, both women and of course men. And I'm delighted my colleague Senator Clifford Lee is going to be seconding the motion, but it is an all-party motion in the House and being supported by everyone here. And the Women's Caucus has, in the short time in which it's been in place, has already had a very powerful voice, I think, on women's issues and on policy issues generally. And we held, for example, a hugely successful international conference of women's caucuses in Dublin Castle last September, bringing in women parliamentarians from all across the world, from developing countries and developed countries alike. And what was really interesting, I think, for all of us who took part in that was to share our common experiences as women in parliaments across the world, and to share the experience for almost all of us of being in a minority in our parliaments. And of course, I don't need, Minister, to say to you or to anyone else how few women are still, we still have, how low our representation of women still is in the Dáil and in the Seanad. Somewhat better in the Seanad at 30%, but still very poor. And the Dáil, of course, at 22%, still far too low, despite the great achievement of the quota, which has, of course, raised our proportion of women's representation from the previous high, which was only 16%, to the current high of 22%, or 35 women out of 158. And I'm hopeful we'll be joined in the gallery very shortly by a group of our future women leaders, the women, young women and indeed some young men, who took part in the Department of Justice's Politics Needs Women competition to mark the centenary of women's suffrage in Ireland last year. And they, each of the 16 finalist schools created a different video, a short video clip on why politics needs women. Incredibly creative, incredibly original videos. The winning school from Clane and Kildare was brought the two students involved and their teachers to New York in March to take part in the Convention on the Status of Women events there. So it was a great prize. But the videos in their entirety are really powerful. I was very proud and privileged to be chairing the judging panel of the videos, and I just wanted to commend all those who made the videos, and to say how glad I was that we were able to host them today in the Department of Justice just now, and that we'll be hosting them here in Leinster House. That's the 16 school finalists, and we're hopeful that they'll come in to watch some of this important debate. So this debate is, as I've said, an initiative of the Women's Caucus, and it's a very important initiative because it marks the first time that menstruation, that periods, have been debated in both in the Seanad today and in the Dáil 2 weeks ago. And I think it's perhaps not surprising, given how few women representatives we have had over so long, over the 101 years that women have been that women have had the right to vote and have been elected to the Dáil. It's perhaps not surprising there's been so little reference to menstruation, and yet it is dreadful that something that is so integral a part of women's health, that's such a norm for all of us as women and as girls, has not been debated and has not been talked about openly. And I very much hope today we will have male colleagues in the Seanad speak as we did in the Dáil. And I know certainly for Labour, my colleagues Deputy Dan O'Sullivan and Deputy Sean Sherlock both spoke in the Dáil debate. So that was important that men and women will participate. And of course there is increased awareness around period poverty in particular. So it's not just speaking about menstruation or about periods for its own sake, but also to speak about the real issue here, which is an issue not so much just for women's health, but an issue of poverty. And I know, Minister, you'll be very aware of this. And this increased awareness around period poverty has opened many people's eyes to the issues at play here. And there have been quite a number recently of legislative and policy initiatives to tackle period poverty, of which this motion forms part. And I would like at the outset to commend the work of those councillors who have brought this forward as an issue issue, in particular my Labour colleague Councillor Rebecca Moynihan, who first brought the issue of period poverty to the fore in Dublin City Council. And last September, councillors in Dublin City Council supported Rebecca's motion to provide free sanitary products in Dublin City Council-owned buildings. So they'll be available now at libraries, sports centres, council offices and community centres. A really progressive step forward, a very practical one, and indeed it's now been followed. My Labour colleagues in Dunleary, Deirdre Kingston, and in Wexford, George Lawler, have ensured similar motions have been passed in their councils, and I commend them for raising awareness of this issue. We could say indeed that the issue of period poverty is having a moment. It is being highlighted, not just in Ireland, but elsewhere too. We've seen an initiative online, Dads on Pads, fathers speaking with their daughters about periods. I know that's hugely important within my own family. I have 2 daughters. It's very important that they would feel comfortable speaking with their father about such an important health issue for them. Just last month, a film about an amazing initiative in India to provide sanitary products to women won the Academy Award for Best Short Documentary at the Oscars. Period, End of Sentence, that's the film title. It's a powerful film about the PAD project, a group of local women in India who learn how to operate a machine that makes low-cost biodegradable sanitary pads, which they sell to other women at affordable prices, helping to improve feminine hygiene by providing access to basic products, but also supporting and empowering women to tackle and shed the taboo in India surrounding menstruation. And this is not a taboo that's unique to India or to any one country. Clearly, this is something we have to tackle in every country. And a very effective publicity campaign accompanied the film, focused on the twin issues of stigma and on the real issue of the financial burden for women and girls. And indeed, at the AV room briefing that Deputy Martin and the Women's Caucus organised 2 weeks ago, all of us who were present heard very powerful and moving testimony about the real impacts of period poverty for women and girls in developing countries, many of whom have to miss a great deal of school because they have no access to sanitary products that would enable them to attend school. And so we've seen in other initiatives also to tackle period poverty. Aditya Gupta, a young entrepreneur in India, seeks to explain menstruation through a comic book she's produced called Menstrupedia, which has already reached 150,000 girls in India as an educational tool aimed at breaking down the stigma of talking about periods. Plan International Ireland, who were represented at our AV room briefing, has termed this the toxic trio of period poverty. First, the stigma and taboo of not being able to speak openly about menstruation. Secondly, insufficient education about periods and menstruation, not just for girls in school, but also for boys, who also, of course, need to know about female health. And thirdly, the third part of the trio, the cost and lack of affordability of sanitary ware, basic hygiene products. And we know, as I've said, from the work of Plan International and of other organisations, that there are millions of women and girls around the world who cannot afford period protection. And along with that, and so we need to tackle that, and that's part of the text of the motion. But along with that, we need to make an effort to rethink the education we are providing about menstruation and to shake off, as I've said, the stigma and taboo bound up with menstruation. So this new movement, this new political impetus around period poverty seeks to address not just the financial and practical barriers to accessing adequate sanitary protection, but also it seeks to tackle attitudinal and cultural problems, attitudes which suggest that women shouldn't have to, attitudes which continue to suggest that women have to whisper or speak among ourselves about time of the month or use euphemisms like that, and we're all very familiar with them, or to hide tampons up our sleeves and so on. So there's this ongoing issue around stigma and around shame, and that has to be tackled in conjunction with our tackling of the financial barriers. But the financial barriers are very real. So while we can focus on the attitudes and on the culture, and that's very important, the financial barriers are very real. And just last May, the UNFPA, the Family Planning Association of the United Nations, published a comprehensive review of available evidence on menstrual health management in East and Southern Africa, which again powerfully underscored the ways in which period shame and misinformation had undermined the well-being of women and girls, making them vulnerable to gender discrimination, to child marriage and early marriage, to exclusion, to violence, to poverty and to untreated health problems. And it's, as I said, well documented about the link between menstruation and lost time in school, but also the links between menstruation and lost wages. Women around the world who experience limited access to sanitation facilities in their workplaces and in their education facilities. And the UNFPA report highlighted some important initiatives taken by individual countries, such as in Kenya, where schools distributed sanitary sanitary pads to tackle girls' absenteeism. The UNFPA has been supporting these and similar initiatives around the world, seeking to ensure that girls do not have to miss school due to lack of availability of adequate sanitary pads and sanitary facilities. And we see in the UN's own Sustainable Development Goals, again, the impact that lack of access to menstrual health has on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly the access to sanitation facilities in Goal 6, and of course the very important achievement of gender equality listed in Goal 5 of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And I'd just like to say, Minister, I know we now are joined by some of the finalists in the Politics Needs Women competition that I mentioned earlier, and so you are all very welcome from the different schools. There are, as I've said, there were 16 schools in the final. 13 of them have been in today in the Department of Justice and in Leinster House to see the workings of the Dáil and Seanad and, of course, to hear us debate. And it's, I think, very timely that we are debating an issue of women's health and that we are debating this motion on period poverty when we're joined by so many powerful young voices who represent, as I've said, the future of politics in Ireland, and a future, I hope, that is more equal for women. So I've spoken about the impact of period poverty in developing countries. I've spoken about the work that UNFPA are doing and the work that Plan International and other development agencies are doing. But period poverty is an issue also in this country. And again, we heard very powerful testimony at our briefing in the AV room about the impact that lack of access to sanitation products and sanitary products has for many women and girls here in this country. It affects quality of life, it affects access to education, access to work, and indeed all sorts of other aspects of active life, such as sporting and so on. Rebecca Moynihan has pointed out that homeless women, women living in direct provision and women on low incomes struggle with access to sanitary products here in Ireland, just as women in developing countries, women and girls in developing countries have struggled for so long. And again, our motion today seeks to tackle this aspect of period poverty here at home, as well as in other countries. And I just want to commend the Homeless Period Ireland organisation, founded by Petra Hanlon and directed brilliantly by Claire Hunt, which now has 30 drop-off points for people to donate sanitary products to homeless women. And indeed, we had a drop-off point here in the Oireachtas to coincide with the debate in the Dáil on period poverty 2 weeks ago. And I very much hope that won't be the last time we have a drop-off point here in the Oireachtas, and that we make that a very regular event, that we would have such drop-off points, so that again it will raise awareness about period poverty here in Ireland as well as in other developing countries. I know, Lasky Hirlich, that I'm running out of time, and I know the motion is to be seconded by Senator Clifford Lee. But I will say finally, and again just mindful that we are joined by such powerful young advocates for women in politics in the gallery, that no girl or woman should be held back from developing and thriving because of the stigma that surrounds periods. And this motion, we hope, will just be the beginning in Ireland of taking period poverty seriously, of tackling issues around stigma and tackling issues around access to sanitary products. We hope that the government will take up our challenge in this motion, and that we will see practical and tangible initiatives take place to address this real issue of period poverty for so many women and girls throughout Ireland and indeed internationally.
You will have 4 minutes again at the end.